Hi, my name is Colin Campbell-Boussiere, and I want to talk to you about a specific formative assessment that I use in my classroom every single day, actually multiple times, almost every single day. It's called public examination. It's a tool for checking for understanding, a formative assessment, and then it uses error analysis to reteach targeted skills. So let's get into this. All right. What is it and what do you need? I'm going to read this real quick. I promise I won't be doing that throughout this, though. So public examination is a formative assessment which uses teacher-facilitated conversations about student work, shown on doc-cams, etc., to both assess trends in student understanding and to reteach targeted content. Public examinations can use the examining of common error, unique answers, or exemplar answers in order to highlight common mistakes, misconceptions, and model exemplar responses to questions. You don't really need a lot for this beyond what is in a normal classroom, and as far as I can tell, in most math classes today, you're probably going to have a doc-cam. But if you add a doc-cam, or there's a whole bunch of different apps you can get for smartphones these days that allow you to do some form of screencasting. But you need some tool for ideally showing video or at least a photograph of student work so that you can have a conversation about it. So when is it used? How is it done? Notice throughout this, I am a math teacher. I'm going to be trying to frame this whole conversation in terms of examples from math class, but part of what's beautiful about public examination is it's a tool that any teacher across any discipline can add to their classroom. It doesn't matter if you teach music or if you teach history or if you teach math, etc. This is a really great tool. So check it out. When is it used? Two primary uses. First is immediately following the initial instruction at the beginning of class. Again, doesn't matter what your teaching style is, if you use direct instruction or a discovery-based model, anything, you do that and then you use this tool. And the second time that I really love to use it, and most people use it, is right at the end of class, just before you release students for their exit ticket. It's a great tool for stamping a common misconception and making sure that students are really successful as they go into that exit ticket. But those are the two main times, but you could use it at the very beginning of class as a check to see what students remember from a previous day. You could use it you can use it in the middle class. You can use it at any point, but those are the two primaries. How's it done? I'm going to go through all of these things you see written right here, but that just gives you a little bit of an idea where we're about to go. So how's it done? Backwards planning. I think great instruction really starts with backwards planning. You need to know where you're trying to go in order to assess in order to help students get there. So step one, identify what questions you want students to answer, i.e. you need to create your exit ticket, right? Once you have your exit ticket, you also need to know what does a great response look like. So you create your exemplar. Once you have those two things, you should be thinking, and honestly, as I'm doing my exemplar, I'm always thinking, where are kids going to mess up, right? What kinds of mistakes and misconceptions are we going to run into along the way? As you'll see in a second, it's really helpful to then take that. My lesson plans are always on the board, but some people really like to have those misconceptions and mistakes close at hand and actually put it on their clipboard. How is it done? So you need to deliver the instruction, right? So we did our backwards planning, then you teach a little lesson. however that happens, whatever that looks like in your class, and then you're going to release students to attempt the problem. This is where the primary assessment happens. Students are working on solving an equation where where they have to do the distributive property, right? You're going around, you're looking at student work, you're looking for common trends, right? Maybe I identified before that distributing a negative is going to be a problem, right? So as I'm going around, I'm specifically looking for those specific misconceptions. Did they distribute the negative correctly? Did they distribute the negative correctly? Did they distribute the negative correctly? It is really, really important during these 3 minutes, and obviously the amount of time may vary, but approximately 3 minutes, that you don't get sucked into trying to help students answer questions, right? It's really hard. I suck at that. It's one of my big struggles is I get sucked in. You want to help kids, but the thing that's going to help kids the most is if you can really get around and you can see as many individual student pieces of work as possible, and identify those common trends, right? So in addition, right? So I'm going around, did they distribute the negative? Did they distribute the negative? The other big thing I'm looking for is did kids come up with a unique way of answering the question, right? Maybe instead of distributing, you can actually solve a problem where there's parentheses by dividing by that number that's outside the parentheses on both sides of the equation, right? So did somebody come up with a unique way of answering that question as well? And the last thing that I look for as I'm going around and I'm taking that quick survey of like how students are doing is I'm also looking for who just did a phenomenal job of showing their work. Honestly, I also look for who used pen because it shows up better under the doc hand. But yeah, so you're looking for either primarily for common mistakes and misconceptions, and secondary for unique answers and exemplar answers. Once you've identified what that trend is, now you need to identify which student's work is the best for you to put under the doc hand to show that, right? So again, it might be as simple as who did their work in pen, because that's going to be easy for everybody to see. But it might be more complex, right? Like maybe there's a couple different ways that people made that mistake, right? Maybe some kids just ignored the negative and just distributed it like it was positive, or maybe some kids distributed the negative to the first term but didn't do it to the second term, right? So identify which students have the best examples, right? Maybe you're going to take multiple examples, but who have the best examples of either a mistake or a unique answer, or again, I think collecting an exemplar answer often helps facilitate a really good conversation. In just a second, I'm going to talk about what those conversations are, right? So, bada bing. So these are our 3 that we're going to go over right now. So when you put student work under the doc cam and you're examining a common error, okay, first thing, when you're walking around, give students a heads up that you're going to take your paper. Second, make sure you, when you start the conversation, you start by finding some way of praising the student's work. This is a phenomenal opportunity for you to build growth mindset, to create a culture in your classroom that's okay with making mistakes. Because if you're not making mistakes, you're not challenging yourself. And if you're not challenging yourself, you're not learning new things, and you're certainly not pushing yourself to learn as much as you could, right? So we want kids to be okay with making mistakes in our class. Having a public conversation and making kids comfortable with putting their mistakes in front of all their peers is a great opportunity, right? I pretty much start every time by asking the class if we agree with the answer. And then from there, I want to also, again, especially when we're looking at a student's mistakes, I want to push students to identify what are some good things that they see before we actually start examining the error. Once you dig into that error, make sure that you finish up with questions that really are solution oriented, right? Like, why do you think they made this mistake? And what tricks can we use to make sure we don't make this mistake again in the future? The last thing, which I didn't actually list on here, is using inclusive language is really important, right? And so trying to say we instead of they, I think also helps promote that culture within your classroom. That's positive. When examining unique answers and when examining exemplar answers, you're going to ask pretty much the same questions. Again, do we agree with the answer? What did they do that's different, etc. I love the question of like, what if they didn't do blank? Would it still be correct? Hypotheticals and follow-ups like why really push student understanding to a different level. And again, finish with solutions-oriented questions. Yeah, again, exemplar answer. You got to be careful when showing exemplars because you don't want to create culture in your classroom where kids think the way to get attention and to get their stuff shown is to be perfect, because if they think that's the case, then they're less likely to make mistakes. So make sure you ask questions like, what could they do better next time? To really highlight that it's not perfect and that there's always room for us to improve. Also, questions like, did anyone else do this a different way? I think also highlights that even in a class like math where we think about there as being one solution, there's actually multiple ways of doing things correctly. You from the top, right, you did your backwards planning, you taught your lesson, you released students to do their work, you identified trends, you picked student work to go into the doc-cam, you had your conversation. So now you need to do some type of mini lesson. You want to reteach the specific skill. One of my favorite ways to do this, again, is to have a student come up and attempt a similar problem on the board, and again, we can then facilitate a conversation about what that student's doing, why they did that, and why we think they did that correctly, or what they need to do it better. And then assign specific problems, right? So instead of just release students to do work in general, tell them to work on specific problems first, because this allows you to then circulate around the room again and see whether or not students are really, if they've fixed that mistake that you were trying to address before. And then you can repeat this process as many times as you want, although I usually only repeat it one time after this, just before the exit ticket. Why is this a great tool for assessing all learners? First of all, it's visual, it's auditory, it's kinesthetic. You're hitting students on a whole lot of levels at the same time. There's so many different ways for students to participate, and so students who excel in certain areas and struggle in different areas can put more effort into those areas where they can be more successful, or they can challenge themselves on those areas that are harder for them, right? So there's everything from independent work, group work. You can share your written work with the class. You can offer changes to somebody else's work, right? You can share from your seat. You can come to the board. It's a space where alternative solutions, and like if you can, a student who comes up with a unique way of doing something, maybe a student does something in a way that's really visual while everybody else is just like writing out the equation, right? That's awesome, right? And this becomes an opportunity where instead of that being something that's tricky for you to assess or seems off task, this assessment tool becomes a great opportunity for you to celebrate the fact that we are diverse learners, right? Even if you don't teach in an inclusion classroom, nobody in that room learns exactly the same way. Nobody thinks the same way, and this is a great way to celebrate that. And then lastly, this is important to me. It's easy for teachers to differentiate. Firstly, you don't need to do anything different from what you normally do to differentiate for your students, because you're using the student work, and you don't need to create a different PowerPoint. You don't need to create a different assessment tool. You're taking the work you were going to use anyway, which should be differentiated, and then you're sticking it. You're making it visual for everybody. So that's probably sticking it under a doc cam. And then the last thing is, it's really easy also for the teacher to assess students, assess different parts of this participation, this tool for different learners, right? So like for one student, I can primarily look at how they're answering higher ordered questions when we're examining work on a board. And another student, I can primarily look at, did they attempt the whole problem independently when I released them for that initial 3 minutes. Yeah, anyway. Moving on, extra goodies. I'm at 16 minutes, so I'm going to basically skip over this, but I think the big thing is when you give kids a heads up that you're going to take their work, some really beautiful things happen. Again, you can come back and read this if you want to. I'll attach the slides. So in conclusion, how do we know when where the learners are so far? That's the big lever. That's the 3 minutes of walking around class and looking for those trends and misconceptions. How do we know where we want learners to go? Backwards planning, right? By knowing what your exit ticket is, knowing what an exemplar answer looks like as when you walk into the room, means that when you see students attempting problems, you know what things they need to do differently in order to get to the answer you want them to be able to provide. And then how do we know, how do we keep learners moving towards their target? I think the first piece of this is so much easier for teachers with more experience, but just the way you ask questions and what questions you ask should be pushing students towards that target, right? For newer teachers, you probably want to script out what you're going to say in order to ask questions that are going to do this. And then obviously the reteach immediately following the public examination. Thank you very much. I appreciate you.